Hi everyone, this is Lyra again. We'll see if I can get through the part 2 of analyzing series between Maru and Time in the WCS Global Finals group stages. So, in the first series, which, ended up being a very close, a mostly close back and forth series that ended 3-2. Spoiler alert for you Internet Explorer users, resulting in a time victory. The two have met again at the end of the group stage, and I just wanted to compare the two series to show the ways that each player either did or did not adapt, either in their builds, in their strategies, in their tactics or timings, and just in other little gameplay things. In the first series, I was hard on both players, but especially Maru, for not having scouts, spotters, and defenses in areas that had neither vision nor units in reserve. So what I mean by all that is, on a map, for example, on a map like this, the main base is very exposed by air. And so knowing this, you would expect a player, if they want to be safe, to have vision here to see stuff coming from north to south to hit the main, vision here to see units coming this way, especially if this is the third base, and to see if air units are coming this way. Vision here to see air units coming this way into the net, and either vision here, or like here, or two out of those three, something like that, to see things coming by land. And except in some of the early stages of the game, Maru consistently didn't have any of those. Well, okay, if you don't have vision here, then surely you're going to want a missile turret perimeter here, so that if the drops you can't see come, you're prepared. Or if you don't have missile turrets, then surely you'll have a reserve of Marines or something to react to, stim on top of, and destroy said drops. But for the most part, both players didn't have that kind of setup. And I think both players took damage as a result of those inadequacies, but consistently was Maru who suffered more. Probably because stylistically, Time usually has the initiative, is very aggressive, is very good at being aggressive, and so he was able to punish Maru for not being prepared for these sorts of things first, such that Maru was always reeling, stuck on the back foot, not in a position to take advantage of the fact that Time's making some of the same mistakes. Now, I haven't paid attention, too much to this game so far, but basically what we have is the same setup that Time has used in every single game except for Thunderbird. And so that build is the barracks first, 2 racks expand on 3 Reapers, a 3rd CC on 3 Reapers, and 2 Marines with bunker. He's played with this setup a few different ways. Actually, I'm not sure if... Now that I think about it, I don't think he's had the same exact setup here to any 2 games. So, for example, the very first game of the first series, we saw the Cyclone before the 3rd CC. In the second, or the third one, we saw a tank. We saw a 3rd CC, then a tank, then a Cyclone. In the final game of the last series, what was it? It was CC Raven Cyclone. So, unless there are subtleties here that I'm missing, I think it's fairly safe to say that the order does not exactly matter, so long as you converge on a third CC, a cyclone, tank production, one Raven, stim. The third barracks comes after the third CC, then you'll see 2 E-bays, then the fourth gas. Maru has mostly gone for 2 gas builds, 2 gas expand builds, with the exception of one game in the first series where he proxy Reapered, and one game, the final one, where he went gas first Reaper expand. So, unless I was completely not paying attention, I'm pretty sure he did a 2 gas build. Or actually, I can confirm that. No, he did Reaper expand then, because there's no Hellions. Oops. Okay, so we see a gas first Reaper expand by Maru here, which is the build he lost the first series with in the final game. Now, the setup here, where the starport after making, in this case, 1 Raven, just 1 Raven if it's not 2 gas. This is the same thing he did in the game on Triton in the first series, where the starport after making 1 Raven, instead of swapping to a reactor, builds a new reactor, and then builds its own reactor, with the remaining reactors able to be used by the second and third barracks. And then into E-bays and fourth gas. So, except in situations, just a Reaper, except in situations where one player took damage, typically what we've seen across these series is that when Maru goes for 2 gas, he usually gets a little bit behind time using the 2 racks. But here, where time has gone 2 racks and Maru has gone 1 gas expand, or a Reaper expand, he's maintaining a slight SCV lead instead. Okay, wow, that's a very fast 4th CC by time. This is the only time we've seen time make a 4th CC before the 4th and 5th barracks. And that is definitely atypical, in general, not just of time. For example, we can see here, Maru's getting 4th and 5th barracks, with no 4th CC yet. Okay, and this is why I wanted to compare the 2 series. These depots weren't here in the first time they faced each other on Triton. Now they are. Now it's there to see times move. And he has units here with this high number of medevacs to react. So if time drops and doesn't pull back the way he did, Maru crushes this completely. If time sees this, his defense ready, or reacts just by being caught here, lands instead, and pushes this way, Maru can do exactly what he's doing, and instead of sitting here with the units, pick up and boost over here. This is possible because he went for, once this reactor was up, the first 2 production cycles were medevacs, so he's gone up to 4 medevacs before Viking production. Now, that is what he did on this map in the first game, but that's not how he used these units. And notably, it is completely different than what Maru had done in all of the other, I should say the games that preceded the Triton game in that first series, where there he instead made 4 Vikings, 2 production cycles of Vikings rather than 2 production cycles of medevacs before any medevac production. And so, I guess if you compare this situation to one where Maru has gone for the Vikings first. If Maru has 4 Vikings and they're sitting here, and Time sees them, as he's trying to drop, and then rotates over here, if there are 4 Vikings and not Marines, it's possible that these medevacs just drop under the Vikings anyway. Or if the Marines are in the main and the Vikings, and Time can retreat quickly the way he did, if he lands here and Maru has Vikings and there are Marines here, these Marines are trapped, they can't react to this, and Time may still be able to get an advantage here. And so the adaptations, both compositionally and tactically, that Maru has made have enabled him to completely shut down the kind of moves that were giving Time an enormous advantage in the previous series. I don't know why he's not using that techlab with the second factory. He did in the first game, and then he just forgot about it forever after. Okay, so spotter-wise, there are air spotters in the form of these depots. Awesome. This is a step in the right direction. These are improvements that Maru has made to his play. Still no ground spotters, which I think is bad, but at the same time, he has a much better defensive position, not in terms of a massive defense, but he has a lot of depth to his defense. It's very difficult. Basically, the way his setup is, he's not going to ever get an initial advantage in any one spot, but he's in a position where he can't ever get completely overwhelmed in any one spot either. So, in a lot of ways, it's comparable to his play, his setup on Winter's Gate of the first series, except with improvements. And so this is something the casters noted, that he's taken this base at about the right time to start a 4th, after having actually taken a stupidly early 4th. So it was a good gamble, a psychological play, to fake Maru out, to make Maru think the game is completely even. It is... What I'm wondering at, though, is since Time delayed his 4th and 5th barracks to get this CC, and then also got this CC right after the 4th and 5th barracks, I'm surprised that the Marine counts are so even. Maru's been much more aggressive this game with his 2nd factory and 2nd and 3rd starport timings than in the previous games. And Time's been pretty disciplined about this 2nd factory timing. It's later than Maru's this game because of this command center. But fairly consistently in this series, Time's been lagging behind in his extra starport timing. It just didn't matter that much. But here, since Maru has been correcting some of the inadequacies of his play from the first series while maintaining the advantages he did have, he's just in a much better position. Okay. So after praising all the nice things Maru's done, here he's getting caught out of position because he doesn't have a ground spotter. Like, he's forced to scan each time something walks into his sensor tower rings. So it's costing him so much more money than just putting a Marine here. I don't understand it. At least he's fixed the air vision problem, which is, I guess, the greater existential threat. Okay, I mean, yeah, the Vikings are in position, so he doesn't need a depot there at the moment because the Vikings are there. But surely the Vikings can't stay here the whole game, or he'll lose. Because the moment Time fights over here, or over here, and has Vikings and Maru doesn't, Maru's losing, right? I don't understand at all why he's still refusing to make turrets. He can clearly afford them, because he's maxed. Like, this tank is trapped because he didn't put the second factory on this tech lab. So, they were in very similar positions. Time's army wrecked Maru's base here. Maru's counterattack wrecked Time's base here. The difference is Maru had a little more, I think, in reserve ahead of time. But I think more so just he stayed a little more on top of his macro as they've unmaxed. Yeah, so as it happens to have turned out, when the dust is settled, Maru was able to get more damage done than Time. Because he was able to knock out the third and the Nat, whereas Time only knocked out the third, not the Nat. And so, at the moment, I guess because Time invested less in his aggression, he has more units left over as the dust settles, at the expense of a catastrophic SCV deficit. But what I wanted to point out is, while Time has more forces, he can't keep track of these, because there's no way to confine them. There's no way to force him to go into an unsafe position, because he doesn't have these turrets. I mean, these can go back and forth between this fourth and the main as many times as they want. And I think Time has enough units he can prevent it from damaging him in either spot. But that ties down this whole force, which prevents him from counterattacking and recouping his losses. I'm surprised that Time, when he was here, didn't just drop the main. Like, he kind of peeked in the Nat and saw some tanks and then retreated. Okay, yes. He's basically shut this down at the expense of total map control. So, this is a departure from what Time had done earlier, where when he got these starports up, if he got add-ons on them, he only got one techlab and one reactor. I think the two techlabs, as I said before, is the better option, and he has done it, and it's enabling him to get up this ramp. Surprised to see the armory idle. And so, big thing I wanted to highlight is, in this game, you know, Maru's adaptations weren't perfect, but he's clearly reacting much more aggressively to what Time's doing to give himself an edge in the series. But it's not clear to me that Time is making any changes to his play at the same time. I guess the big thing that was different for Time in this game was the really fast fifth, well, the really fast fourth, and then the normal fourth timing fifth, which is to say that when Maru was getting his fourth, Time was getting his fifth. But then Maru aggressively seized the initiative and was able to come out on top. It seemed like Time didn't know what to do and couldn't make a good decision on the spot once the initiative was in Maru's hands rather than in Time's. And so a combination of Maru cleaning up his play and forcing Time into a scenario where Time is less comfortable, is out of his comfort zone. Those things combined allowed Maru to just completely smash him, despite having had a very close, unfavorable first series. So interestingly, Maru is Barracks first, Reaper expand, and Time is using, I'm just going to call it the Time build. Excuse me. So what's happening here is Time has the initiative on account of going 2 racks expand, whereas Maru's gone 1 racks expand. but the variation, or I guess you could say flavor, of Maru's Barracks First Reaper Expand minimizes the damage that time can do. I'm surprised that he dropped SCVs at all. I don't think he needed to. But what you normally see in a Reaper Expand in T vs. T is you get one Reaper, one Marine, and then an add-on, usually a reactor, but it could even be a techlab to get a very fast cyclone. Or you'll see, if it's been gas first, you could see a Reaper, factory, and then immediately the reactor. And that could be for hellion production or just faster reactor marine production. Instead, Maru has completely omitted add-ons thus so far, instead producing marines after the single Reaper and a hellion. And so that gives him the units he needs to shadow the movement of these Reapers, especially in conjunction with this bunker. Although, since he dropped the two SCVs, it's not clear to me how this variation of a Reaper Expand is actually better than Time's build. I suppose it still has faster excuse me. It still has faster tech. But I'm not sure if I see that this is better than his normal 2-gas expand that he had done most other games. It seems to have the same advantages and disadvantages, this build to the 2-gas. Faster tech but slower SCVs. Although Time was slow to make that orbital, he's actually getting behind now on SCVs. Kind of funny. Oh, I see. He was slow because he got started a much faster 3rd CC. So this was 3rd CC before Cyclone. So Time does seem to favor 3rd CC before Cyclone. I believe he only made a factory unit before the command center in their very first game, when he was sort of sizing up Maru. And so, I don't know if this is just a map-specific thing. We didn't get a chance to see it when they played on this map in the first series. But I just wanted to point out that, again, Maru is correcting some of the things that I've been complaining about in his play, the things that I think made the first series so difficult for him. I don't know if these are the best spotter marines in the world, but they're spotter marines, and they're controlling air pathways. And then he's got this hellion. Well, it's on another air pathway. Yeah, I don't know. Maru's setup, vision-wise, is still not perfect, but he's working on it. And that's good. Kind of funny the way that hellion accidentally slipped by these Reapers. Okay, so I had highlighted that in the previous game, and at the end of the first series, Maru had switched out of his normal setup and was getting medevacs first from the starport, and often, or at least I should say specifically on Triton, the starport was donating a reactor to these barracks. But here, despite using a Reaper Expand build, he got 2 Ravens, did a proper barracks starport swap, and then is going into reactor Viking production. So this is more typical of Maru's play early in the first series. So apparently he doesn't think that the medevac first setup is inherently superior, but is only superior on the maps that have such exposed mains, namely Triton and Disco Bloodbath. And it's interesting because the previous time he used a Reaper expand, he only made the one Raven. Well, Maru was able to crush it, but Time was able to get into his position and at least force lost mining time on account of there being no air vision. So it's not clear to me that Time's move was good. I mean, I think he lost at least a little more than Maru did, but I think the point of that move wasn't to try to get a favorable exchange, but rather to immediately grab the initiative with the hopes that he can build up momentum and keep the initiative in his hands. But since he was so uncomfortable in the previous game, a scenario in which he had allowed Maru to get the initiative first. So I think he's just trying to force his way in to get into a rhythm that benefits him over Maru. Ugh. I really hate Maru's vision now. Seems like not only has his build reverted to what he was doing at the start of the last series, but he's completely abandoned all attempts to maintain vision other than sensor towers. Though admittedly, these two sensor towers do see a lot. But while they see a lot, they don't see enough to let him take his fourth base. And so I'm not actually sure why Time is so completely ahead on Marines. They have the same barracks count. Oh, that's weird. Mars are so slow in add-ons. Somehow, I don't actually understand how. I would need to rewind. Just trying to figure out what Maru did spend his money on that resulted in him getting a little behind on these, either the barracks production or the add-ons. I'm going to have to rewind. So... Oh, okay. So Maru has done what Time did on Triton. That was just the last game, right? Yeah, the previous game, the first game of this series, Maru has done what Time did, which is start the 4th CC before the 4th and 5th barracks, whereas Time is doing the standard approach. So, Maru's gone for the faster fourth, but he can't land it because he doesn't have the spotters, the forward spotters he needs relative to his setup to get his army into position before Time's army can get into an attacking position. And so, Maru has, I guess, good vision on 3 base from these sensor towers, but the sensor towers aren't useful, the sensor towers are all that he needs while he's on 3 base, but he's not preempting his needs on 4 base. And these sensor towers aren't enough for when he is on 4 base, and so Time has a larger army value because he didn't cheat on his 4th CC timing. And so it's hilarious that Maru's tried to get away with this super fast 4th, but it's actually going to be a later 4th because he delayed the barracks timing, and thus doesn't have the army value he needs to beat Time. But what I'm getting at is his smaller army would be enough if it was already here in a strong defensive position to preempt the landing of this 4th. But it wasn't there because he didn't know he needed to move it there, because he didn't have vision, any kind of spotter, past these sensor tower rings. So, I would say that Time is completely ahead, since he has a higher SCV count, had his 4th mining longer, and has an enormous marine advantage, albeit at the expense of a tank lead and Viking lead in the favor of Maru. But the problem is that Time's main advantage, this marine count, is really difficult to utilize on this map. And so, because Time has maxed first and can't find an efficient way to unmax, he is sort of permanently behind in tanks and Vikings because he doesn't have the free supply to catch up. And so, what he needs to do is take advantage of the fact that Maru absolutely refuses to build missile turrets and just fly in here. Yeah, okay, Maru has the air lead, but those air units aren't everywhere. If Maru knows that Time has stuff in these sensor towers, so he's not really going to be that sensitive to movements within the sensor tower. So if, say, these units, which Maru isn't really worried about because he's already considered them since they've entered his sensor tower ring, if Time loads these units up in 2 medevacs and just boosts them right here, all of a sudden, these Vikings of Maru are going to fly over here and kill the medevacs, but the Marines are here, they can do damage to Maru here, kill this tank, kill some SCVs, force some of these units to move over here, and then possibly that gives Time an opening to damage Maru's position here. I doubt it, though. But what it does is it lets him unmax in a way that lets him damage Maru at the same time, and then having unmaxed, he can make tanks. Oh my god. Time needs to work on his building placement. He's been getting tanks stuck this whole group stage. But so it will let Time use these extra tech buildings to catch up on tank count and Viking count so that he has a good position as the game goes longer. Because the longer that Time can't use his Marine lead, the closer that Marine lead gets to becoming a liability, not an asset. And so these Vikings, they give Maru air control, but only in one spot, really. And since Maru has such horrendous peripheral defense, Time really ought to be taking advantage of that, which is, according to, the way he wants to play anyway. Certainly he's been seizing the initiative this whole game. I'm surprised that he's petering out now, despite having everything he needs to keep the aggression up. A drop here or a drop here, especially if done simultaneously. What's Maru going to do? Counterattack? Not on this map. By the time Maru's force gets here, Time can handle it while having also done damage here. That means Maru has to split his forces up, which means he's even more vulnerable to continued aggression. Which is why Time's been working so hard to seize the initiative. Well, I said that Time needed to unmax, but I did say he needed a way to unmax safely, and that wasn't it. I mean, he's been using all of his orbital energy on scans, so it's not like he wasn't aware of Maru's tank count. So seeing Maru's tank count and not having Ravens to disable them, there's no reason for him to expect that that attack was going to work, no matter how wide the concave was. It's just sort of funny that Maru has left himself so vulnerable to moves that Time has been utilizing in the series, and that Time suddenly refuses to use them when they would be most advantageous. So, the setup that both players are getting into, with a bunch of extra CCs and sort of aggressively expanding, for Time even while clearly behind, this is a product of the map. It's just very difficult to attack because, there's one path, really. It's this ugly thing that snakes around. And okay, these rocks are gone. So now there's two paths, one here and one here, but ultimately they both get funneled here, so it's still just one path. Which means by land, Time only needs to defend this one spot, and it's hard to get a concave. Notice, when Time attacked this position, he had a concave, and he still couldn't attack. And so if you can't attack, expand. Ironically, Maru was respecting the sensor tower, and he didn't need to. That force that Maru just had here could easily have just dropped here. These units aren't going to do anything to it. There's no medevacs here to boost anything. The Vikings can come in and kill the medevacs, but the Marines are still left here to ravage his position. Okay, some missile turrets. I'll never understand why they aren't more aggressive with these turret defenses. Yeah, it costs money, but it doesn't cost as much money as keeping this much of your army in reserve on the defense. The sensor towers alone are clearly not sufficient. And yeah, it's very easy for me to see these things because I see both players' vision, but they have scans. They've seen the way each other have played. There's no reason this late in the series, especially in the second series, why both players don't also know these things that I'm saying. I mean, clearly, Time respects airplay, drop play. He has these two turrets. Why does that mean he doesn't need turrets here? And probably also here. It's an enigma to me. And why Maru doesn't think he needs anything? Okay, he's got some here. But certainly for most of the game he didn't. Okay, so I mean, I think Time had an advantage earlier that he squandered with a bad attack, giving him a disadvantage. But by this point, they've both remaxed. The game is really anyone's. But Time has sort of gotten himself stuck again by remaxing on too many Marines. Therefore, at the expense of tanks and Vikings. Although, the discrepancy between the two numbers isn't great. But it's just not clear to me on this map how he can possibly use these Marines the way he's trying to. Now, as I've said before, I think there are a lot of opportunities for those Marines to be used via drops. But he refuses to attempt it. I mean, he can see Maru's Air Force. All he has to do is put medevacs where that Air Force isn't. It's a lot of starports. So here I am, lamenting the fact that Maru refused to defend against drops. Well, Time finds a way to use that extra Marine count just by running in. Maru's position is so exposed that not only is he vulnerable to drops, he's vulnerable to units just running up his ramp into his third. I'm not a fan of Time's retreat. I really think he should have tried to advance while he knew Maru had to respond to this attack. Well, no, I take it back. I like Time's retreat because the retreat coincides with the battlecruise coming out, and the attack here was necessary because it let him unmax to get those battlecruise out in the first place. No spotter. So, I'm surprised that Time isn't trying to attack this base. I mean, it's an orbital. He scouted that's an orbital. It has no defenses, really. 2 missile turrets doesn't do anything to a bunch of Marines. And these 34 Marines really aren't able to accomplish very much since it's got into the battlecruiser age. Meanwhile, Maru is attacking that position of Times, although not with Marines. But he could have. I mean, Maru has some defenses, but I think it's clear he has a lot of holes in his play. But it seems like Time doesn't have the initiative. Doesn't know how to look for it. I think he just has too many Ravens at this point. Yeah, they're good versus the battlecruisers, but like 4 or 5 I think are plenty. At this point, a lot of his supply is pretty useless in straight-up engagements. I don't know why he's retreating his entire army to go after the battlecruisers. The ground army really has to be split off. Although I guess that warp preempts that idea. So what happened there was Time's ground army was spending too much time moving, not enough time shooting. So Maru's ground army was able to get a lot more done because it wasn't over-microed. And then the fact that Time had too many Ravens started to hurt him. I don't think there was like literal space to get auto turrets down. And there weren't enough tech units to even matrix with all the energy. And then also, Time wasn't even maxed at the start of that battle, whereas Maru was. And see, Maru steals a march on him, because Time's the one. I mean, they both aren't using spotters, but since Maru has the initiative, the fact that he doesn't have spotters doesn't matter, but he's in a position to punish Time for not having the spotters. But I mean, you can't always assume that you're always going to have the initiative on your own, so you want to be prepared for the worst before it happens. And that's easy to do without hurting the rest of your play. Yeah, I mean, Maru's smaller number of Ravens got more done than Time's larger number. So Maru's gone back to his standard openings, the 2-gas, with SCV pool for command center for expansion. So the point of all that skirmishing was Maru went for the 2 gas into 3 Reaper 2 Hellion, and he was trying to lure these units here into a Hellion ambush, because then if he can kill them with some stuff left over, then he can probably run by this bunker and get damage done here. Or depending on how many Reapers are left, just hop back in and damage here. But timeout microed him. Interesting. So this is the first game where Maru has done a 2 gas build and only made 1 Raven. He's made just 1 Raven before, when doing Reaper Expand, but even while Reaper Expanding, he usually made 2. So he's doing what I'm going to call the Triton variation, where the starport's going to donate the reactor. I think it makes sense on this map. It's a little harder to abuse the air surface area of the main, its exposure. It's easier on Triton and on Disco Bloodbath than here, but that area does exist. So the reasons that make the ASAP marine production good on those maps, I think makes sense here as well. Then the big question is, do these make Vikings or medevacs? But I don't think I've ever seen someone get the super fast 3 barracks with 2 reactors ahead of time, and then go into Vikings. So I expect to see the medevac production first, which will be typical of this series, but not of the last. And then a departure from last game, where Maru had gone back to the Viking production first. So Time definitely had the initiative there, and when he attacked, he had the larger army. But somehow he traded really inefficiently, such that by the time the matrices had ended, he didn't have any units left over. Not sure how that happened. In theory, Maru should have been outmaneuvered, having let Time get into that position. I mean, he had a good position with a bigger army. That was Time's fight to throw, and he did throw it. So Maru nearly got punished for not having spotters. I don't think Maru did anything spectacular there, it was just that Time played worse. And that's fairly characteristic of this second series, is that Time's play seems to be crumbling. I suspect that he was getting tired, which was a theory that I had come up with while watching, which is why I wanted to compare these 2 series to see whether it was a matter of Maru making good adjustments or Time's play getting worse. And I think we can see that while Maru has been adapting his play a little bit, that he hasn't been adapting his play to the extent that you'd expect if that were the sole reason that he won this series. I like this air spotter. And a missile turret? Okay. Maru's making some adjustments, just no ground spotters. Yeah, so time not having ground spotters is out of position when Maru's force comes up. So again, the player that has the initiative has the ability to take advantage of the fact that the other player doesn't have spotters, etc. Now, the question is, when Time had the initiative, why wasn't he able to do the same? I mean, here, he just squandered a larger army value. The first time he dropped here, I mean, we can look for it. Try and find out what happened. I mean, mostly it just looked like... Okay, so what force? This is 2 tanks, 6 marines, 2 medevacs. Okay, so it's not a very big force. But it does get in there. You know, there's no spotter yet. So, Time sieged first, but barely quicker. This is a brand new tank. I guess it was sort of unlucky that Time happened to drop exactly when all of these units came out of the buildings. Like, a little bit later, all of these units are in the net. A little bit sooner, these units don't exist. Oh, the SCV pull. Maru's tank is shooting units. Time's tank shot SCVs. And then by the time it was able to shoot Marines, Maru had a fantastic split on the Marines. So basically, Time just got completely out-microed. But he did come in with a pathetically small force. I think he's going to get a lot more out of those tanks if he actually boosts this way and drops here. Dropping here allowed Maru's Marines to get a concave to minimize the damage of that tank. But really, it doesn't look like it was a very good move by Time. It's just too few units to make a difference. Now, if these are just, you know, Marine full medevacs, no tanks, he can drop, skirmish, and then leave before things get unfavorable. But since there were tanks in the mix, that wasn't an option, unless he wanted to lose the tanks for free. And if he loses tanks for free, he basically would have guaranteed whatever damage he had done wouldn't have been a favorable trade. Okay, so, you know, no spotter yet, but that's fine because he has units in reserve. Basically, this time, Time is just dropping on top of stimmed Marines, and he can't retreat effectively because of the bubbles. So, basically, Time gets in once, squanders the attack. Maru adapts by getting a much better defensive position here. Time gets in here once, squanders the attack with bad micro, and Maru reacts and has a force ready for it if it comes again. And reacts by getting an air spotter, and reacts by getting a missile turret. and still has some defenses here that both can defend against air drops here or here, as well as ground attacks coming in. So Maru opened with some of the mistakes he was making in the first series, but unlike in the first series, which I had criticized him for, he didn't maintain the same mistake. He corrected it after time showed that mistake to him. So Maru adapted over the course of this game to clean up his defenses. Meanwhile, time just threw away his army. I mean, this is the third time he's thrown it away. Pretty clear military advantage by Maru. I mean, time has literally nothing going for him. Like, I'm not even going to call 2 Vikings air control. They're actually irrelevant in numbers that few by this point in the game. And so he started the command center, but he doesn't have the army with which to secure it. And no spotters. And so, since he has had the initiative, he wasn't, I guess, preparing for a time where he wouldn't have the initiative. And so while he was throwing away the initiative, he wasn't preparing for this position where he suddenly is on the back foot. And that means any holes in his play are very, very relevant. No air spotter, no air spotter, no ground spotter, no ground spotter, no ground spotter. And so basically the only way time is fine here is if Maru tries to attack in here and just suicides everything. And well, he doesn't. And while I think this instant GG by time was the correct move, I don't see, even from a bird's eye view, how he can possibly come back. But I think that the fast GG goes hand in hand with what I was saying earlier, that I think time had just become exhausted by this point of the tournament. This is the final match, the final series of the group stage. I think he had spent everything he had on the series earlier, which is unfortunate, but it shows that while he has a lot of good properties to his play, that stamina is perhaps something he needs to keep improving on, and stamina is something that Maru has so much of. And it just shows you that there's more to the game than just build strategies and tactics. Well, that's all I had for you guys. A comparison of these two T vs. T series by the same players, showing both different ways that the players can adapt mostly the same openings, adapt them to each other and adapt them to the maps, and see ways that players did or didn't adapt other elements of their play, both over the course of individual games, over the course of individual series, and over the course of both series collectively. I hope this was insightful, and that's all I got. See you guys next time.